This is the Retro XP Podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games from the first and second gen with the Odyssey and the Atari 2600 all the way up to Gen 7 with the Xbox 360 and the PS3. On today's episode, we'll be talking all about the little system that could, the TurboGrafx 16, or what it was known as the PC Engine overseas, in Japan mostly. Not the biggest boy on the block, quite literally in some cases, and was unfortunately shadowed by the SNES and the Genesis at the time, but nonetheless it had something to offer in the console wars during this time. I'll be going over its construction and tech, a little bit about the companies that made it, its history, the lifespan, and we'll go over some of the biggest games at the time. All right, with that, let's get started. TurboGrafx 16, or like I said in my intro, the PC Engine, as it's known outside North America, was a home video game console developed by Hudson Soft and manufactured by NEC. It was released in Japan in 1987 and then in North America 2 years later. It landed first in the fourth generation in Japan, where it was supposed to directly compete with Nintendo's Famicom, but by the time it came out here, it was in direct competition with the Sega Genesis. Now, before we head into the TurboGrafx 16, we got to start with Hudson Soft, the major developer behind everything with this. Hudson Soft was actually founded in Toyohiroku, Sapporo, Japan on May 18, 1973 by brothers Yuji and Hiroshi Kudo. The founders grew up admiring trains and named the business after one that regularly passed their childhood home, their favorite being the Hudson locomotives. So interesting that this kind of started out as a train company or like a train enthusiast type of place. Yuji Kodo had originally planned to start a coffee shop, but there was already one in the same building that they were in, which resulted in the decision to change it to a wireless radio shop and selling art photographs. Pretty random. In September 1975, Hudson began selling PC products, and a few years later, in 1978, they started developing and selling video game packages from a dedicated store called Cosmos Sapporo. So in the early 1980s, they got into a little bit of video game development and churned out a bunch of kind of shovelware crappy titles that weren't really noteworthy. I think they were more focused on, quantity over quality in that sense. At least that's how they kind of described it. In late 1983, though, Hudson started to kind of reverse course on that and started to prioritize that quality over quantity, and thus became Nintendo's first official third-party software vendor for the Famicom with their flagship game Lode Runner, which sold them 1.2 million units after its 1984 release. Wanting to become a bigger player in the video game space, they got to working on their own system with NEC, or Nippon Electric Company, to manufacture what they called or prototyped the C62 system, or the PC Engine, as it was known in Japan. NEC at the time was a company that pretty much dominated the Japanese personal computer market with their PC-88 and PC-98 platforms. NEC, though, lacked the vital experience in the video game industry and approached numerous video game studios for support in trying to make their own dedicated console. And by pure coincidence, NEC's interest in entering the lucrative video game market coincided with Hudson's failing attempts to sell designs for the then advanced graphics chips to Nintendo. So in July 1985, Hudson Soft approached and pitched them a new add-on for the Famicom that played games using their patented B cards, which they had experimented with on the MSX computer at the time. Nintendo liked this concept, as it had the ability to store full games and overwrite existing ones. However, due to the cost of the technology and the fact that they would be required to pay royalties for each card sold, Nintendo ultimately decided to pass on Hudson Soft's proposal. And we've seen this kind of behavior with Nintendo where it's like they want to kind of try to work with third-party development studios, especially for hardware, but then they kind of think about it and they're like, you know what, we just want to do our own thing. We saw that with Sony, how, they dogged Sony on that, and then now we see it here. I mean, this wasn't anything major that Nintendo did, but I don't think they did anything with cards later on. But this breaking apart with Hudson Soft and Nintendo eventually led to the partnership between Hudson Soft and NEC. So Kind of like a I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. The TurboGrafx 16 uses a custom-built Hudson Soft HU6280 CPU. This is for all you tech nerds. An 8-bit CPU running at 7.16 megahertz, paired with two 16-bit graphic processors, an HU-C6270 video display controller, and an HU-C6260 video color encoder. It includes 8 kilobytes of RAM, 64 kilobytes of video RAM, and the ability to display 482 colors at once from a 512 color palette. It's pretty big at the time. The sound hardware built into the CPU includes a programmable sound generator running at 3.58 megahertz and 5 10-bit stereo PCM. So not bad. What was the most unique aspect about this console, I feel, were the HuCard ROMs. They're thin credit card size cards that insert into the front slot of the console. PC Engine HuCards have like 38 connector pins in them. And the TurboGrafx 16 HuCards here, and I would think I heard them calling them turbo chips. They basically reversed 8 of those pins as a region lockout method. So if you're buying a TurboGrafx 16, you can't buy PC Engine games and expect them to work on your TurboGrafx 16. The power switch on the console also acts as a lock that prevents HuCards from being removed prematurely while the system is powered on. So you can't just rip it out of your console or anything. The European release of the TurboGrafx 16 did not have its own PAL formatted HuCards as a result of its limited release, with the system instead supporting standard HuCards and outputting a PAL 50 Hz video signal. So for reference, if you want to know what I'm talking about with these cards, so imagine your credit cards, like a normal credit card. These HuCards are a little bit longer in length, bit thicker with the pinstripe on one side, kind of like on one of the long ends. And you slot this directly into the system's card slot, as I said before, once you power on the system. It locks the card in the slot, almost kind of like an ATM machine, so to speak. The unfortunate thing is this doesn't print money. The system design, nothing remarkable really, but what's amazing about this little console are its dimensions. The PC Engine version, 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches by 1.4 inches in height, making it almost a literal square, and is still to this day the smallest home console to ever have been released. And I'm talking major consoles. We're not talking about like mini systems and all this other stuff that we're seeing. So the system was originally sold with one standard controller known simply as the pad. Simple naming, I guess. It has a rectangular shape, just like a normal like Nintendo controller, kind of similar in style, with a directional pad, 2 action buttons numbered 1 and 2, and 2 rubber select and run buttons. Another controller known as the Turbo Pad was also launched separately with the console, which added 2 turbo switches for the 1 and 2 buttons with 3 speed settings. And the switches, if you don't know, allow for a single button press to register multiple inputs at once. This allows for like rapid fire and, vertical or horizontal side-scrolling shooters. It's a very nice little quality of life measure. The Turbo Pad actually became standard issue controller with the TurboGrafx 16 in North America. So we never got the pad for our TurboGrafx 16. We never got the original one, which is fine. I mean, the standard American Turbo Pad is just fine. That, whether you like turbo switches or not, it's up to you. But I think just by a design choice, that controller looks a little better, I think, than the original pad that the PC Engine came with. So oddly enough, all PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16 consoles only have one controller port. In order to use multiple controllers on the same system and play multiplayer games if you want, a separate peripheral known in Japan as the multi-tap, and in North America we called it the turbo tap, was required, which allowed up to 5 controllers to be plugged into the system. I mean, what a weird choice, because all your other competitors have multiple different, at least one other controller port to play at least some 2-player games straight out of the box. Weird design choice, like I said, but I think it looked like, when you look at the game catalog, it looked like there was a lot more single-player games, so maybe that was what they were marketing. System made its debut in Japan on October 30th, 1987. Sold for about 24,800 yen, which was $155 US at the time, and it was a tremendous success. Sold 500,000 units in its first week of release. And in its total lifespan, which ended in 1993, it sold 8 million units in just Japan alone. Not bad. Not bad at all. And I think I even read at some point it was the best-selling system in Japan, maybe for a couple weeks. In 1988, NEC decided to expand to the American market and directed its U.S. operations to develop the system for the new audience. NEC Technologies boss Keith Schaefer formed a team to test the system out. Here, they found out that there was a lack of enthusiasm in its name PC Engine. It doesn't really just fly off the tongue, does it? And also felt its small size was not very suitable to American consumers who generally prefer a large, futuristic design. And you know us Americans, we like our stuff big and we like our stuff looking cool. Like, how it looks in your TV stand means a lot. It really does. They decided to call the system the TurboGrafx 16, and they spelled graphics GRAFX. And it's a name that kind of represents its graphical speed and strengths and its 16-bit GPU. Also, I guess adding an X to anything just makes it cooler. I don't know. That's just me. They also completely redesigned the hardware into a large black casing, and all this testing and all this like redesigning that they were doing, this process and NEC's questions, even just about the system's viability in the United States, just delayed the TurboGrafx 16's debut. In the end, the TurboGrafx 16 was more rectangular in shape, which is unlike the PC design. It still looks slick, I thought. I mean, honestly, I think the TurboGrafx 16 design looks a little bit better than the PC Engine design, but that's my personal preference. If there wasn't a delay in all this, if NEC didn't drag their feet, and if they didn't do as much of this focus testing, I wonder if this would have done better in the grand scheme of things. Because when you think about it, this could have beat the Sega Genesis to market, and it probably could have sold buco dollars compared to the Genesis when it came out eventually. So I don't know, it's just one of those things. It's missed opportunities, and you just wonder what could it have been like. The TurboGrafx 16 was eventually released in the New York City and Los Angeles test markets on August 29th, 1989 for $199 at the time. And this was nearly 2 whole weeks after the Sega Genesis had released in North America. So that's why it's like, man, if they would have gotten out maybe a little bit sooner. For reference, the Super Nintendo came out 2 years later on August 23rd, 1991. So these guys were real late. The system itself was bundled with Keith Courage and Alpha Zones. What a name, Keith Courage. It's not quite the hottest launch title. It's not a Super Mario Brothers or a Sonic the Hedgehog or Altered Beast or anything like that, but they did what they could. They had to come up with a title that, what was wrong with Bach? I don't know. The Genesis, of course, as we know, quickly eclipsed the TurboGrafx 16 after its American debut. NEC Americans operations in Chicago overhyped the system a lot. They put all their dollars in it and its potential success, and quickly produced 750,000 units before release, far above what they actually thought the actual demand was. And regardless, this was very profitable for Hudson Soft, as NEC paid Hudson Soft royalties for every console produced, whether it's sold or not. So Hudson Soft made their money no matter what. By 1990, it was very clear, though, that the system was performing very poorly, and NEC just could not compete with Nintendo and Sega's marketing. The NES was still doing hot at this time, actually, and Sega hit the ground running pretty fast with the Genesis. With all that blast processing power. That was the inside joke. I'm sorry. In Europe, though, the console is known by its original Japanese name, PC Engine. However, its release had an interesting start, though. PC Engine imports from Japan drew a cult following, with a number of unauthorized PC Engine imports available along with adapters in the United Kingdom during the late 1980s that converted the NTSC signals to PAL signals. And PAL is obviously, as you've heard me say, universally, it's European, TV signals. In 1989, though, a British company called Mention manufactured an adapter PAL version called the PC Engine Plus. This was not endorsed by NEC, not giving them their blessing or anything like that. This was purely done off the book, so to speak. From November 1989 to 1993, though, PC Engine consoles, as well as some add-ons, were imported from Japan by French importer Sodapeng. This came after considerable enthusiasm in the French press for this system, and the PC Engine was largely available in France and Benelux through major retailers. It came with French language instructions, also an AV cable to enable its compatibility with their French television sets. So kind of a weird start. NEC, I think at the time, was a little dismayed with how it was doing in America and the United States, and they were like, well, I don't think it's going to do that well in Europe, but sounded like there was some interest. So after seeing the TurboGrafx 16 falter in America, as a result of all this, what they were seeing, NEC decided to just cancel their official European release. Units for the European markets were already produced, though, which were essentially US models modified to run on PAL television sets. It wasn't like they did anything special with it. NEC sold this stock to distributors in the United Kingdom, Telegames, and they released the console in 1990 in extremely limited qualities. I don't know what those qualities were, but I can only imagine buying an actual TurboGrafx 16, a PAL version, an official PAL version. I can only imagine how much that costs. So by March 1991, NEC reported that it had sold 750,000 TurboGrafx 16 consoles in the United States, with some numbers totaling up to 2 million. Kind of by the end of the system's life cycle. Compared to the hardware sales of the Genesis and the SNES, though, the TurboGrafx 16 fell way behind. In Japan, the PC Engine was very successful, as we talked about before. At one point, I also mentioned, too, it was like the top-selling console in the nation. And TurboGrafx 16 had a pretty decent start, up front. It sold well, but eventually it suffered from a lack of support from third-party software developers and publishers as its kind of major downfall. There was, the excitement of buying the system right away, but then no support for it further in. And it's like, what am I sticking around for? So you get those early adopters that come in, but if they're the ones that are going to be kind of like talking your system up, and then you're looking to see, what else is coming out for it? I mean, there's just nothing. There's really just nothing. Kind of what happened with the Wii U, I feel. There wasn't a lot of good third-party support there. It's different now for Nintendo. They reversed course with the Switch, but, for the Wii U, it was a little bit different. A total of 678 games were released for the TurboGrafx 16. In North America, the system featured Keith Courage and Alpha Zones as a packing game, like I said. The PC Engine, though, received a lot much better support, third-party support in Japan, and the TurboGrafx 16 struggled to just gain any traction here. Hudson brought over many of its popular franchises, such as Bomberman, Bonk, Adventure Island, to the system with nice graphical, impressive follow-ups. They had these systems, they had these games, they had these franchises on the Nintendo systems because they were like Nintendo's third-party developer. But coming to the 16-bit era, especially at this time, man, that was big. Hudson also designed and published several original titles, such as Air Zonk, which is a really good game. Dungeon Explorer, also a very good game, a little cool RPG. Compile, the publishers developed Alien Crush and Devil's Crush, two well-received, pretty demonic-looking virtual pinball games. I'm not much of a pinball game. I'd rather play pinball in real life, but Alien Crush looks pretty freaking metal. Namco contributed several high-quality conversions of its arcade games, such as Valkyrie no Densetsu, Pac-Land, Galaga 88, Final Lap Twin, and Splatterhouse, as did Capcom with a port of Street Fighter II Champion Edition. I don't know how well that runs, but it's can't be that much worse than the Sega Genesis versions and the Super Nintendo versions. The system at the time was very well known for its horizontal and vertical side-scrolling shooters, which a lot of people, that's like I said, that's a genre I'm not necessarily into, but I may get into at some point. So you got some really good shooters like Gradius, Salamander, Superstar Soldier, and Soldier Blade. Galaga 88, like I talked about, R-Type, Darius Alpha, Darius Plus, and Super Darius. And one of the most prolific RPGs of our time got its start on this console too, with Ys 1 and 2 for the CD-ROM. And I'll talk about the CD-ROM later once we kind of get to the hardware, additions and stuff. So some of the interesting things about this console not mentioned yet are the hardware additions, like I just mentioned just now. We start with the CD-ROM add-on called the TurboGrafx 16. It attached itself to the back of the console and was able to play CD-based games as we know. It was released in November of 1989, just a few months after the base system was released, to the tune of $399 with no games bundled with it. I mean, that's a lot to ask for. In December of 1990, with the Game Boy making money, getting some good traction, NEC tried to get a piece of that pie with the Turbo Express, which was essentially a portable version of the TurboGrafx 16 home console. Came out to the tune of $250, but it dropped to $200 2 years later. I think it should have dropped much sooner than that. It played all the HuCards that were compatible with the home consoles, but the handheld did not have any internal memory to save data, so you couldn't really save your progress in any game. So any RPG that you played was like pretty much useless. You couldn't really save. Due to a problem with the faulty capacitors, though, with the Turbo Express, I mean, this was pretty much an industry-wide issue in the early 1990s. I mean, this affected the Sega Game Gear as well. Faulty capacitors, sound failure, frequent problem, the Turbo Express as well. The backlit LCD screen, which actually was pretty state-of-the-art at the time, used in the Turbo Express, was another source of problems, with the rate of pixel failure being very high. Brand new Turbo Express systems out of the box, brand new, often had several bad pixels. Text is often pretty difficult or almost impossible to read in certain circumstances. Many, fonts were written to be seen on a television screen, not on necessarily a small LCD screen. I mean, I don't really think it's necessary to own this at all. I mean, it's probably, you could probably do some, configuring right now, and you can, the tech is good enough that you can actually probably put in new capacitors and make it look nice. You could probably slap on a nice little IPS screen on this, but I don't know. I don't think you really need this, especially in its original form. Maybe just like a shelf piece or something. That'd be kind of cool. Because it's a really nice looking handheld system. It looks pretty cool. Kind of beefy. Same form factor as a Game Boy, but obviously I think it's a little bit bigger. Probably fits better in adult hands as opposed to kid hands. So NEC released the Super CD-ROM 2 in 1991 in Japan only, which was an upgrade from the original CD-ROM, which boosted its BIOS and boosted its RAM power. I don't think we got that here separately, the CD-ROM 2, until the Turbo Duo came out, though. So in response at the time to waning sales, NEC tried to get a second win by launching the Turbo Duo, which combined both the CD-ROM and the HuCard formats into one whole system. One box, no attachments, nothing. At the time, this was designed by Turbo Technologies Incorporated, which was released in North America in October 1992 at the retail price of $299 at the time. It's a little better price point than just the CD-ROM itself 3 years later, or 3 years earlier, I should say. Nonetheless, the price was in part a consequence of the relatively high cost of CD-ROM drive manufacturing. Knowing the price being a bit too high regardless, they included a booklet of coupons for Turbo Duo games and accessories, plus several pack-in games on 2 CD-ROMs, Ease Book 1 and 2, and a Super CD compilation of 3 TurboGrafx 16 titles, plus a new title. This included Bonk's Adventure, Bonk's Revenge, Gate of Thunder, and Bomberman. So not bad. I mean, when you think about it, that's like 5 or 6 pack-in games, and Ease Book 1 and 2. I mean, that's a pretty nice pack-in game to put in. So what they wanted to appeal to the masses, and they needed to up their marketing game. And TTI, or Turbo Technologies Incorporated, created a mascot called Johnny Turbo, which was apparently a superhero military character whose alter ego was Jonathan Brandstetter. And he was based in part on the real-life game developer and Turbo Duo brand manager, John C. Brandstetter. Consisting of a 3-comic campaign that ran in issues of Electronic Gaming Monthly, the stories featured Johnny opposing agents of the company FEKA, F-E-K-A, who were tricking children into buying their CD-based add-on. And I assume this is a dig on Sega and the Sega CD. I don't know. But it's kind of adding up. Instead of the Turbo Duo. So I didn't hear great things about this ad campaign. I mean, some were calling it pretty petty and childish, so I don't know. Ultimately, with relative newcomers, Hudson Soft and NEC trying to break into the market, this series of systems unfortunately broke them. Exclusive to Japan, the two partners would release the PCFX in 1994, which was a 32-bit CD-ROM system. The story with this one is very interesting. Its form factor is like that of a tower PC, like what we know as, I'll kind of almost know as now. It's not like big like one of like a normal tower, but like maybe like a smaller one. And this was intended to be upgradable. The PCFX was uncompelling in the marketplace due to lack of a 3D poly-based graphics chip, which is wild to me. 32-bit and no polygon-based graphics chip. I mean, that's what PlayStation was set out to do. That's what Sega Saturn was set out to do. And the reasoning for this was that polygon processors at the time were relatively low powered, which resulted in figures having a blocky appearance. Which, okay, sure. And that it would be better for games to use pre-rendered polygon graphics instead. NEC also directed Hudson Soft to only make games based off popular Japanese anime at the time, and it wasn't able to bring in their household names like Bonk and Bomberman to the console. This was discontinued almost as fast as it was brought out in February of 1998, and NEC subsequently just got out of the home video game console business. Just didn't work out for them. So in May of 2020, though, Konami released the TurboGrafx 16 Mini packed in with 60 games that were originally on the system's lineup. And I guess I didn't know this, but in 2005, I just found out about this as I was researching this episode. In 2005, Konami acquired a 55% controlling stake in Hudson, and later purchasing the company outright in April of 2011. The following year, though, Hudson merged completely with Konami Digital Entertainment, which retains its game catalog and IPs. And I should have known this because, when I started seeing like Konami's name slapped onto like Super Bomberman games, I'm like, I don't know why I didn't put two and two together, but my brain just doesn't brain sometimes. Well, it's the little system that could, and unfortunately couldn't. This seems like a short episode because this was like an important system, but it didn't have much to show for it. And it didn't have much that it brought in terms of competition. It was a freshman debut for a partnership that dreamed big, but just couldn't plant its flag in the same battlefield that Sega and Nintendo were fighting on. These were two giants, and NEC and Hudson Soft wanted a piece of that pie. And at the time, these were the two big dogs. And it really wasn't until we got the Sony PlayStation that we got a serious competitor to the big two. With a unique game card design, upgradable packages with a CD-ROM, the first of its kind back then, which, this came out before the Sega CD or any kind of CD-based system, I mean, with the exception of PC gaming. And handheld, that pretty much sucked. The TurboGrafx 16 is still well known for being that kind of like niche system that only a mother can love, and that tried to do something different and something kind of unique. I don't own one personally. I actually own the Polymega module, and I never owned one ever in my life. So I don't unfortunately have the personal affinity to the TurboGrafx 16, but I did hear a lot about it, and they tried as best as they could to market it. But unfortunately, the airwaves were dominated by Sega and Nintendo, and I guess there was only room for two at the table in those days. And this is, I talked earlier about how I'm trying to collect for the Master System. And because I never had a Master System growing up, and it's kind of fun to find Master System games and to kind of collect Master System games. And then now it's like I'm thinking, hey, I would love to collect TurboGrafx 16 games. However, it's kind of with collecting game, it's the law of scarcity. Not a lot of TurboGrafx 16 games out there, so a lot of them are going to be pricey. You're not going to find $5 to $10 TurboGrafx 16 games just laying on a shelf somewhere. You're going to be paying some money for these things. And I think the cheapest game I bought, I think I just recently bought the Keith Courage game, and I think I paid like $30 for that, which to me, I'm thinking that's cheap, and it probably is. I mean, comparatively to all the other ones, I think the most expensive game I have for the TurboGrafx 16 now is like Air Blanc, which I paid $90 for it loose. But yeah, I mean, you get into the space of collecting physical and collecting the cases and everything in the boxes. Yeah, that price just jumps up like crazy. So, I'm not going to be collecting everything. I'm not going to be expanding my collection 10, 20, 30 fold. It's just, a system that I'm just going to keep an eye on. Alien Crush, I think, is definitely on my list to get at some point. I think Blanc's Adventure 2 is definitely on my list. I have Blanc's Adventure 1. Then, maybe, yeah, I'll have to kind of go around, see what's out there and see what's there. I do, on my Polymega, I do have a CD-ROM on there. So maybe finding some of the CD-ROM based games would be kind of beneficial for me too. So, thanks for listening to this episode. Obviously, as you know, when we follow up with an episode like this, I'll be talking about some of the best games to have on there, some of the best rated, some of the most expensive, some of the cheapest, and obviously maybe some hidden gems out there that maybe you or I don't know about. So that's always fun, researching those episodes and kind of making my own personal list to find, hey, maybe this is a game that I think I want. Maybe this is a game I think I want to try to pick up. So, well, thanks for listening, guys. Let me know if you like this kind of video on my socials on X, Threads, and YouTube at RetroX Podcast. Take it easy.